A 3,000-year-old crystal lens sits in a museum, defying the timeline of human invention. This is the legacy of the Assyrian Empire, an ancient superpower remembered for its terrifying armies and colossal stone guardians. But beneath the familiar tales of conquest lies a deeper, more puzzling story. Many of the artifacts they left behind hold secrets that clash with our textbooks. They contain precise technologies that should not exist, depictions of knowledge that feel out of place, and mysteries carved in stone that refuse to be solved. By the end of this journey, you will see 30 pieces of evidence that force us to rewrite what we thought we knew about the ancient world. How did they craft optics rivaling the Renaissance? What were they really trying to show us with their hybrid creatures and cosmic maps? The conventional history of humanity is a story we tell ourselves, but these objects are asking us to tell it differently. What does it mean when the past itself seems to be questioning our assumptions? The first artifact on our list is the very lens that opened this mystery. Unearthed from the ruins of the ancient Assyrian palace at Nimrud, it is a small, oval-shaped piece of rock crystal, ground and polished over 3,000 years ago. To the untrained eye, it might look like a worn piece of decorative glass, but its shape tells a different story. Experts classify it as a plano-convex lens, meaning one side is flat while the other curves outward. This specific curvature is not accidental. When tested, this ancient lens proves capable of focusing sunlight into a sharp, hot point, and it can magnify small objects, bringing fine details into clearer view. This presents an immediate and profound problem for the conventional timeline. According to mainstream history, the first truly ground and polished optical lenses did not appear until around the time of the Roman Empire, nearly 1,000 years later, and the sophisticated optics of something like a telescope belong firmly to the Renaissance, over 2 millennia after this Assyrian artifact was crafted and used. So what exactly were the Assyrians doing with a precision lens in the 8th century before the Common Era? The theories are as fascinating as the object itself. Some archaeologists suggest it was a simple magnifying glass used by master artisans or scribes to execute the incredibly fine details found on ivory carvings and cylinder seals from the period. Others propose it was a burning lens, a tool to concentrate the sun's rays to light sacred fires or for some unknown ritual purpose. Then there are more speculative ideas. Could it have been part of a primitive telescope used not for stargazing in the modern sense, but for surveying distant landscapes or enemy movements? We may never know its exact purpose, but the existence of the Nimrud lens is not really about its specific use. Its true challenge is to our linear narrative of human ingenuity. It forces a simple, uncomfortable question. If the Assyrians possessed the knowledge to grind rock crystal to a precise optical curve, what else did they understand about the nature of light, reflection, and magnification that has been lost to time? This one small artifact cracks open the door to a possibility we often resist. That advanced technological understanding can appear, vanish, and reappear in human history, not in a straight line but in forgotten cycles. Moving from optics to energy, our next object transports us from Assyrian palaces to a 2,000-year-old grave just outside Baghdad. While not found within the Assyrian heartland itself, this artifact speaks to a technological culture that flourished in the broader Mesopotamian world, a world the Assyrians dominated and drew knowledge from. It is known famously and controversially as the Baghdad Battery. Discovered in the 1930s, it appears deceptively simple, a small 6-inch tall clay jar sealed with an asphalt stopper. Through that stopper runs an iron rod surrounded by a carefully rolled copper cylinder. When the jar is filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar or fermented grape juice, something remarkable happens. The acidic solution acts as an electrolyte, allowing a chemical reaction between the two different metals. This creates a flow of electrons, a tiny electrical current measurable at around 1 volt. That is not enough to power a light, but it is unmistakably electricity generated by a human-made device centuries before Alessandro Volta's celebrated battery in the year 1800. The immediate question, of course, is what on earth was it for? The debate has raged for decades. One compelling theory suggests it could have been used for electroplating, the process of using an electrical charge to bond a thin layer of gold or silver onto another metal surface. Artisans could have connected several of these jars together to create a stronger current, allowing them to gild small objects with a finesse that mimicked solid gold. Other scholars propose a ritual or medical purpose. Ancient texts describe using electric fish to numb pain, so perhaps this was a controlled way to generate a mild, tingling current for therapeutic or mystical experiences. The truth is, we may never have a definitive answer for its intended use, but the existence of the Baghdad battery, even as a singular, puzzling find, challenges a cornerstone of our historical narrative. It forces us to confront a possibility. If the knowledge to create a basic galvanic cell existed in the region over 2 millennia ago, is it so difficult to believe that the Assyrians, with their renowned schools of scribes and master craftsmen, were aware of such principles? They traded, conquered, and absorbed knowledge across the entire Near East. The idea that electricity was purely a discovery of the modern era begins to fray at the edges. What if it was instead a rediscovery, a principle once understood in practice, even if not in full scientific theory, and then forgotten for 1,000 years? This small clay jar does not rewrite history on its own, but it asks us to hold our assumptions a little more lightly. The quiet hum of electricity gives way to the deafening clamor of empire. To understand the Assyrians, you must first understand their gates. They were not mere entrances, but statements of absolute power, engineered to awe and intimidate. And none were more formidable than the Balawat gates of King Shalmaneser III. Commissioned in the 9th century before the Common Era, these were not simple wooden doors. They were colossal structures sheathed in bands of solid bronze, each band a masterpiece of narrative and metal. When archaeologists painstakingly reconstructed them, they revealed a historical document of staggering scale and precision. The bronze bands, some over 200 feet long if laid end to end, were decorated using a technique called repoussé. This means the scenes were hammered into the metal from the back, pushing the design outward into intricate, detailed relief. The stories they tell are of conquest and tribute. You can see long lines of captured enemies, their postures resigned, bringing offerings of ivory, rare woods, and exotic animals. You see Assyrian chariots charging and foreign kings bowing in submission. The level of detail is microscopic. Individual feathers on arrows, the texture of woven baskets, the strained muscles of horses, all rendered in hammered bronze. This is where the mystery solidifies into tons of metal. The sheer volume of bronze required is the first staggering fact. Estimates suggest the gates required several tons of the alloy, an amount that implies mining, smelting, and refining operations of an industrial scale. But the greater puzzle is in the craftsmanship itself. How did they achieve such uniform, detailed relief across such vast, continuous surfaces? Each band is a single, coherent scene. There are no visible seams or patches where smaller sections were joined. This suggests a mastery of large-scale casting or forging that seems to defy the technological limits of the Iron Age. The most likely method is a sophisticated version of the lost wax process. Artisans would have first carved the entire, elaborate scene in negative on a huge clay or plaster mold. They would then pour molten bronze into that mold, creating a solid band with the design in precise relief. The logistics are mind-boggling. They needed furnaces hot enough to melt tons of bronze, crucibles strong enough to carry it, and molds perfect enough to capture every detail without cracking. The margin for error was zero. A single flaw in the mold or a miscalculation in the cooling metal would mean months of work and priceless resources lost. This is not primitive metalworking, this is high-precision industrial art. The Balawat gates do not just depict an empire's power, they are a physical manifestation of its technological confidence. They force us to ask what kind of society could support such an enterprise. It points to a highly specialized workforce with master metallurgists, chemists controlling alloy mixtures, and engineers managing thermodynamics, all operating with a consistency we would normally associate with a much later age. When you stand before the reconstructed gates in a museum, you are not just looking at pictures of history. You are looking at the proof of a forgotten industrial revolution carved in fire and bronze. But the true power of those bronze gates is not just in their metal, it is in the story they tell. And to find the most politically explosive story the Assyrians ever carved, we must move from bronze to black limestone. Standing just under 2 meters tall, the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III is a masterpiece of imperial propaganda. Each of its 4 sides is divided into 5 panels, a visual archive of the king receiving tribute from 28 conquered nations. It is a roll call of subjugation, a stone ledger of power. Yet one panel on the second register from the top stopped historians in their tracks. It shows a bearded man dressed in fine robes but in a posture of profound humility, kneeling before the Assyrian king. The cuneiform inscription above him is chillingly clear. It reads, "The tribute of Jehu, son of Omri, king of Israel. I received from him silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase, golden goblets, golden buckets, tin, a staff for a king, and javelins." For over a century, this single line of text has sent shockwaves through the worlds of archaeology and biblical scholarship. Here was an Assyrian king, whose reign we can date with precision to the mid-9th century before the Common Era, naming a king of Israel and documenting his surrender. This was not a story written by the Israelites centuries later. This was a dated, contemporary administrative record carved by their greatest enemy. The figure of Jehu is a major character in the biblical books of Kings, a military commander who stages a bloody coup to seize the throne of Israel. The biblical account and the Assyrian obelisk tell different parts of the same story. The Bible focuses on the internal religious and political turmoil of Jehu's rise. The Black Obelisk shows the brutal geopolitical reality that followed. To survive, the new king had to bow to a foreign superpower and pay a crushing tribute. The implications of this convergence are monumental. For a long time, scholars treated the early kingdoms of Israel and Judah described in the Bible as largely legendary, their kings more myth than history. The Black Obelisk changed that overnight. It provided an external, fixed point on the historical timeline, an anchor that confirmed the existence of the Kingdom of Israel and a specific ruler within it at a specific moment in time. This artifact did something rare and powerful. It forced a bridge between archaeology and scripture. It did not prove every detail of the biblical narrative, but it proved the framework was grounded in real historical events involving real historical figures. The obelisk challenges us to reevaluate the historical reliability of ancient texts we might have dismissed as purely theological. It suggests that behind the layers of religious commentary and moral lesson, there often lies a bedrock of historical memory. When an empire's boast and a kingdom's chronicle agree on a name and a date, the ground of history becomes much more solid. The Black Obelisk is more than a list of spoils. It is a silent arbitrator in a debate thousands of years old, offering not opinion but cold, hard stone. Yet the stone narratives of Assyria were not limited to foreign kings and tribute. To witness their artistry at its most visceral and psychologically complex, we must enter the North Palace of Nineveh and walk beside a king in the arena of death. The Lion Hunt of Ashurbanipal is not a single artifact, but a sprawling gallery of alabaster reliefs that wrap around entire rooms. They depict King Ashurbanipal, the last great Assyrian ruler, engaged in a ritualized royal hunt. But this is no simple record of sport. It is a masterfully directed epic carved in stone. We see the sequence unfold like scenes from a brutal film. Lions are released from cages, charging toward the king's chariot. Arrows fly, finding their marks with lethal accuracy. The animals, in their final moments, are rendered with an anatomical precision that feels shockingly modern. You can see the individual ribs beneath their skin, the taut muscles of their shoulders as they pounce, the specific way a wounded lion's hind leg collapses under its own weight. This goes far beyond symbolic representation. The artists captured the physics of movement and the physiology of a large cat in distress with the eye of a naturalist. Even more arresting is the emotional depth. We see lions in various states of agony, one coughing blood, another paralyzed but still trying to drag itself forward with its front paws. Their faces convey rage, confusion, and profound suffering. This portrayal of animal emotion, of individual death, is unparalleled in the ancient world for its raw, almost empathetic detail. Herein lies the profound challenge to conventional wisdom. For centuries, the artistic narrative of Western civilization credited the ancient Greeks, centuries later, with the invention of naturalism, with a great leap from stylized symbols to observations from life. The Assyrian lion hunts demolish that timeline. These reliefs prove that a highly developed tradition of observational art, rooted in the close study of nature, was already in full flower in the heart of Mesopotamia. This was not art for art's sake, however. The hunt was a potent metaphor. The lion represented chaos, the untamed forces of nature, and by extension, the king's enemies. Ashurbanipal's mastery over them in the arena symbolized his divine right to protect the civilized order from chaos. But the artists did something extraordinary. In the process of depicting the king's power, they immortalized the dignity and tragedy of the beast. This creates a stunning duality. The art serves as state propaganda, yet it reveals a culture capable of deep, unsentimental observation of the natural world, acknowledging the cost of the order it celebrated. It suggests a society where artists were not mere craftsmen following patterns, but keen-eyed witnesses granted the freedom to record truth, even uncomfortable truth, within the framework of a royal commission. The lions of Nineveh do not just roar from the stone, they ask us a silent question. If the Assyrians had achieved this level of artistic naturalism, what other intellectual and observational disciplines lost to us now flourished in their shadow? The empathy carved into dying lions reveals a mind that valued observation, but to understand the full depth of the Assyrian intellect, we must move from the gallery to the archive. Buried beneath the ashes of Nineveh's destruction lay a discovery that would redefine the empire's legacy entirely. It was not a treasure of gold or a monument of stone, but a vast, silent repository of clay. The library of Ashurbanipal is a staggering collection of over 30,000 inscribed tablets, and to call it merely a library is to undersell its revolutionary nature. This was the first systematically organized knowledge repository in human history. Imagine a vast, ancient database meticulously catalogued and shelved according to subject. The king's scribes did not just collect texts, they hunted them. They sent agents across the empire to borrow or copy every important work they could find from the older Babylonian and Sumerian cities, creating a comprehensive backup of Mesopotamian civilization itself. The scope of knowledge contained within these fired clay pages is breathtaking. There were detailed omen texts where priests recorded the supposed meaning behind everything from the flight patterns of birds to the shapes found in a sacrificed sheep's liver. There were advanced medical manuals listing symptoms, diagnoses, and complex herbal prescriptions. Legal texts and administrative records laid bare the intricate bureaucracy that ran an empire. And then there was literature. It was here, in this Assyrian library, that the world's oldest great story was preserved for modern eyes, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Without Ashurbanipal's obsessive drive to collect, this foundational tale of friendship, loss, and the quest for immortality might have been lost forever. This collection delivers a profound challenge to a persistent historical narrative. We often think of the centuries following the collapse of great Bronze Age empires as a kind of dark age, a time of cultural forgetting and intellectual decline. The Library of Ashurbanipal stands as a monumental counterargument. It proves that on the eve of its own destruction, Assyrian society was not some brutal, militaristic machine concerned only with conquest. It was a highly literate, administratively complex, and deeply intellectually curious civilization. The very act of creating such an archive reveals a self-awareness, a conscious desire to preserve the sum of human understanding against the ravages of time. This was not a haphazard accumulation of scrolls. It was an act of scholarship. Scribes created catalogues, organized tablets by series, and even added colophons. Notes identifying the source of the original text and the name of the copyist. This level of systematic information management suggests a scholarly tradition that we typically associate with the great libraries of Alexandria or Pergamon, which would come centuries later. The fire that consumed Nineveh ironically baked and preserved these clay tablets for millennia. When archaeologists unearthed them, they were not just digging up Assyrian knowledge. They were recovering the collective memory of Mesopotamia. Our entire understanding of ancient mathematics, astronomy, law, and myth is fundamentally shaped by this single collection. It forces a humbling realization. The light of inquiry was burning brightly in Assyria, and its deliberate preservation of knowledge challenges the very notion that such systematic, encyclopedic scholarship was a later Greek or Roman invention. In these fragile clay tablets, we find the true mind of an empire, not carved in scenes of power, but written in the quiet, enduring script of curiosity. That vast library of clay tablets held the written mind of Assyria, but to protect its physical heart, the empire called upon beings from the edge of reality. Carved into the stone thresholds and guardian slabs of royal palaces, they stand watch. These are the Apkallu, and they are utterly unlike any other figure in the ancient Near East. They possess the powerful, muscular torso of a man, often holding a ritual bucket and a pine cone, but rising from their shoulders are the vast, detailed wings of an eagle. And where a human head should be, they bear the fierce, hooked beak and penetrating eyes of a bird of prey. They are not monsters, not in the chaotic sense. Their posture is calm, deliberate, and dignified. According to the cuneiform texts that mention them, the Apkallu were the 7 primordial sages, beings of immense wisdom sent by the gods in the distant past to teach humanity the foundations of civilization, everything from writing and law to architecture and agriculture. They were the ultimate guardians against chaos, so here is the interpretive challenge carved in stone. What are we actually looking at? Conventionally, historians see powerful symbolism. The human body represents wisdom and civilization. The eagle head and wings symbolize divine knowledge, the ability to traverse between the heavens and the earth, bringing sacred insight down to mankind. They are mythological archetypes, perfect for flanking the doorways of a king who claimed to rule with divine sanction. Yet, the visceral, detailed realism of these carvings gives one pause. This is the same artistic culture that captured the exact musculature of a dying lion. They did not stylize carelessly. When they carved an eagle's head, they rendered every feather, every curve of the beak with ornithological accuracy. So, could these be representations of something more concrete? One fascinating theory suggests they depict high priests or ritual specialists during sacred ceremonies, wearing elaborate ceremonial costumes with bird masks and feathered wings to embody the sage and channel his protective power. This would place them in the realm of ritual theater, a depiction of human practice. Then there is the more speculative interpretation, one that has fueled endless debate. To a modern viewer, the description is undeniably evocative, a humanoid figure with avian features and wings. In the language of contemporary alternative history, this description aligns uncomfortably well with certain depictions of so-called ancient astronauts or non-human intelligences. Proponents of this view ask a provocative question: what if the Apkallu were not symbolic blends but attempts to record, in the best artistic vocabulary available, the actual appearance of beings that interacted with early human civilization? The cuneiform texts themselves call them beings from the sea, or from before the flood, entities that brought advanced knowledge. This is where the artifact truly challenges conventional wisdom. It forces us to confront the blurry line between myth and potential testimony. Are these purely imaginative symbols born from a poetic mind trying to conceptualize divine wisdom? Or could they be a cultural memory encoded in art and myth of a contact event so profound it shaped the trajectory of a civilization? The Apkallu do not offer answers. They stand in silent vigil, their stone eyes holding a secret. They remind us that the ancient world did not separate the symbolic from the literal as neatly as we do. In their hybrid form, they embody the very essence of the Assyrian mystery, a fusion of the earthly and the otherworldly, daring us to decide where mythology ends and a forgotten reality might begin. From the silent guardians of sacred wisdom, we move to the thunderous spectacle of imperial conquest. The walls of King Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh were not decorated with subtle myths, but with a sprawling, panoramic newsreel carved in stone. The siege of Lachish reliefs are a monumental sequence stretching over dozens of alabaster panels, documenting the Assyrian army's brutal capture of the fortified Judean city in 701 before the Common Era. This is history reported by the victor in chilling, meticulous detail. The viewer is placed at the heart of the action. We see the relentless Assyrian war machine in motion. Soldiers raise enormous shields in a testudo formation as they advance up massive, engineered siege ramps. Sophisticated, wheeled battering rams protected by damp hides and manned by crews pound the city's walls. Archers on the ramps provide covering fire, while Judahite defenders desperately throw torches and rocks from the battlements. The outcome is never in doubt. The subsequent panels show the grim aftermath, the price of rebellion. Captives are led away, their belongings piled high on carts. Families are marched into exile, a policy of mass deportation designed to shatter national identity. The reliefs are a masterpiece of psychological warfare in stone, meant to intimidate every visitor to the palace with a clear message: resistance is futile. This is where the artifact confronts us with a profound historiographic challenge. We possess another, very different account of these same events. In the biblical Second Book of Kings, chapter 18, the Assyrian campaign against Judah is described. King Sennacherib lays siege to the fortified cities, and Lachish is specifically named. The biblical narrative focuses not on military tactics, but on theology and propaganda. It recounts the Assyrian field commander taunting the Judahite defenders, questioning their faith in their God and their king, Hezekiah. The climax of the biblical story is a divine intervention where an angel strikes down the Assyrian army, forcing Sennacherib to retreat to Nineveh. Placed side by side, the two records create a fascinating puzzle. The Assyrian reliefs show a decisive military victory, the city taken and its people deported. The biblical account acknowledges the loss of outlying cities like Lachish, but claims a miraculous, last-minute salvation for the capital, Jerusalem. So, who is telling the truth? The answer, as with much ancient history, lies in the purpose of the record. The Assyrian reliefs are a record of a successful military campaign, a trophy of a subdued enemy. They have no reason to mention a failed assault on Jerusalem, if one even occurred. For Sennacherib, capturing Lachish, Judah's second most important city, and exiling its population was a strategic victory worthy of immortalization. The biblical writers, crafting a theological history, sought to demonstrate their God's power to protect his faithful king and his holy city. The miraculous salvation of Jerusalem became the central defining event. The artifact does not give us a single objective truth. Instead, it gives us two subjective perspectives, two pieces of a fractured whole. This forces a multi-source analysis. We cannot rely on one narrative, especially when it comes from the hand of the victor or the pen of the devout. We must triangulate. The reliefs prove the siege of Lachish happened exactly as described, a fact the Bible corroborates. The Bible's claim that Jerusalem survived the campaign is supported by the glaring absence of any Assyrian relief celebrating its capture, something Sennacherib would have certainly commissioned had he taken it. The artifact, therefore, challenges any simplistic, purely theological reading of history. It presents a stark, imperial perspective that forces us to read between the lines of ancient texts, to listen for the silence in the stone, and to understand that history is often the tense negotiation between what was carved, what was written, and what was lost. The brutal clarity of the siege relief shows us the empire's public face, but to understand its private soul, its daily heartbeat of commerce and faith, we must shrink our gaze down to the size of a fingertip. The Assyrian cylinder seal is a masterpiece of compression. These are tiny, cylindrical stones, often no larger than a date, carved with intricate scenes in reverse. Their purpose was elegantly simple. When rolled across a soft clay tablet or a lump sealing a jar's stopper, they left behind a continuous, raised impression, a unique signature authenticating a contract, a shipment, or a royal decree. In a world before paper signatures or digital codes, this was the ultimate security device, a personal mark of identity and authority. But to appreciate the true marvel, you must look at the impression itself. Unrolled, it reveals a frieze of astonishing complexity. In a space the width of a thumb, artists depicted entire mythic narratives, gods on thrones, kings hunting lions, sacred trees guarded by winged jennies. The level of detail is not just fine, it is microscopic. Individual strands of hair, the texture of animal fur, the delicate patterns on a god's robe, all rendered with a precision that defies the naked eye. This is where the artifact presents its quiet, profound challenge. How was this even possible? The stone of the seal itself, often hematite or lapis lazuli, is incredibly hard. The carved lines are sometimes less than a millimeter wide and deep. To achieve this, the engraver needed tools with tips finer than a needle, and more importantly, they needed to see what they were doing. This brings us back full circle to our very first artifact. The existence of the Nimrod lens suddenly becomes not just a curiosity, but a practical necessity. Under even a modest magnification, the engraver's world would have transformed. What looked like a faint scratch to the naked eye would become a deep, clear channel. The artist could correct mistakes, refine curves, and achieve the breathtaking depth and shadow that give these miniature scenes their monumental feeling. This implies a workshop environment of staggering sophistication. It was not a single artisan with a sharp stone, it was a micro-engineering ecosystem. There were craftsmen forging and sharpening ultra-hard bronze or iron gravers. There were specialists selecting and polishing flawless gemstones. And there were artists, likely working under magnification, whose hands had to be perfectly steady, their artistic vision compressed onto a canvas smaller than a postage stamp. The seals challenge our perception of ancient scale. We are accustomed to being awed by the colossal, by giant gates and towering lamashu. But true technological prowess is often revealed in the miniature. The ability to control matter and image at such a tiny scale speaks to a mastery of materials, tools, and human dexterity that feels anachronistic. It reveals an administrative society that valued security, identity, and artistry in every single transaction, from the king's treasury to a merchant's grain shipment. Each time a seal was rolled in clay, it did more than authorize a deal. It stamped a tiny, perfect window into a world where the boundary between art and engineering had simply ceased to exist. The microscopic world of the cylinder seal was a realm of order and identity. But the Assyrians knew their universe was also populated by forces of pure chaos. To confront one of the most terrifying of these forces, we must examine a small, haunting bronze plaque known today as the Lamashtu plaque. Cast in metal, it depicts the demoness Lamashtu in all her dreadful glory. Her form is a chilling hybrid with the body of a woman but the head of a roaring lioness. In her hands she grips two writhing snakes, and beneath her feet she stands firmly astride a donkey, while she herself is often shown suckling a pig and a dog. This is not a decorative image, it is a weapon. In the Assyrian worldview, Lamashtu was not a minor spirit, she was a supreme predator of the most vulnerable. She was believed to stalk pregnant women and newborns, stealing infants from the womb or the cradle, and bringing fever, miscarriage, and sudden infant death. The plaque, then, was an apotropaic object, meaning it was designed to ward off evil. It was likely used in protective rituals for childbirth, perhaps displayed in a room or buried at a threshold as a spiritual deterrent. This is where the artifact challenges a very modern assumption. We tend to draw a sharp, clean line between ancient magic and ancient medicine, seeing one as superstition and the other as a primitive form of science. The Lamashtu plaque obliterates that dichotomy. In Assyria, medicine and magic were inseparable strands of the same system. A physician was also an exorcist, the Ashapu. His job was to diagnose the cause of an illness, and that cause was almost always understood in supernatural terms: a curse, a demon, or the anger of a god. The treatment, therefore, was a holistic blend. It could involve perfectly rational herbal remedies and poultices with proven physiological effects, recited alongside powerful incantations and the use of protective amulets like this plaque. The image itself is a form of diagnosis. Every detail is symbolic and functional. The lion head represents her savage, predatory nature. The snakes symbolize poison and malady. The donkey, an animal associated with the underworld and dirt, signifies her base, chaotic origin. By capturing her likeness and naming her, the plaque gave the unseen threat a form, making it knowable and therefore potentially controllable. This reveals a healthcare system that was, in its own way, deeply sophisticated. It addressed not just the physical symptoms, but the profound psychological and spiritual terror that accompanied complications in childbirth, a leading cause of death for women and infants. The ritual provided a framework for action, hope, and community support in the face of terrifying uncertainty. The plaque does not ask us to believe in demons. It asks us to understand that the Assyrians constructed a coherent, logical model to explain suffering and combat it with every tool they had, from botany to bronze. Their world was animated by invisible forces, and their greatest art was often not about celebrating beauty, but about forging shields against the darkness they believed was always waiting at the door. That protective plaque reveals a world seen through a lens of spiritual conflict, a constant struggle between order and chaos. But the Assyrians did not believe chaos would win, for at the very center of their cosmic vision stood a symbol of perfect, eternal balance. Carved on palace walls, stamped on cylinder seals, and woven into the very fabric of royal garments, the Assyrian Tree of Life is an artifact of ideology. It appears not as a naturalistic oak or palm, but as a highly stylized, symmetrical plant. Its trunk is straight, its branches curl inward in perfect mirrored pairs, and it is often topped with a palmette or a winged disc. Flanking it almost always are two figures, sometimes the king, sometimes the winged Apkallu Genis, in a gesture of reverence or pollination. To a modern eye, it might look like elegant, repetitive wallpaper, a simple decorative motif. This dismissive view could not be more mistaken. This tree was the axis of their universe. Its primary meaning was cosmic order. In a belief system where the world was a fragile construct constantly threatened by primordial chaos, the tree represented the divine, structured blueprint of creation itself. Its perfect symmetry mirrored the balance of the heavens, the orderly cycle of the seasons, and the harmonious rule of a just king. When the king is shown touching or standing beside it, he is not just decorating his wall, he is visually declaring his role as the earthly steward of this cosmic order, the human link between the divine design and the stability of the empire. But the symbolism grows even deeper roots. The tree is also a potent emblem of fertility and everlasting life. The jennies pollinating it with their pinecone buckets are not gardening, they are performing a sacred rite to ensure the continual flow of divine blessing, the sap of the cosmos, into the world. This connects the king directly to the land's prosperity, his legitimacy ensuring abundant harvests and the flourishing of his people. Now, here is where the motif challenges conventional art historical analysis. Some scholars, noting its intricate, almost diagrammatic structure, have proposed it may represent something more specific than a general symbol. Could this be an esoteric map of knowledge? The tree's central trunk with its branching, symmetrical paths is eerily reminiscent of later mystical diagrams, most notably the Kabbalistic tree of life in Jewish mysticism, which maps the 10 emanations of God and the path to spiritual enlightenment. While a direct historical connection is impossible to prove, the structural parallel is provocative. Both are schematic models of a hidden, divine reality. Both use a central axis and balanced branches to describe the flow of energy or wisdom from the heavenly realm to the earthly one. This suggests the Assyrian motif was not just a pretty picture of a sacred plant, but potentially a sophisticated theological and philosophical glyph. Its pervasiveness across all media, from colossal stone reliefs to tiny seals, tells us something profound. It was the visual cornerstone of a unified state ideology, a constant, silent sermon in stone and thread. Every subject who saw it on a palace wall, every official who stamped it on a contract, was being reminded of the foundational principles of their world, a cosmos held in balance by divine will and royal duty. The Tree of Life was their answer to chaos, a diagram of how things should be, forever rooted at the heart of their empire. High in the rugged mountains of what is now Kurdistan, the cliffs themselves bow before ancient kings. Far from the bustling streets of Nineveh or the guarded gates of Nimrud, the rock reliefs at Multai stand as a silent, staggering testament to the Assyrian will to dominate not just cities but the very wilderness. Carved directly into the living rock of a remote valley, these are not portable artifacts. They are the landscape transformed. We see a procession of 7 colossal figures, each standing over 3 meters tall, etched with breathtaking clarity into a vertical cliff face. They depict the great Assyrian gods, recognizable by their horned crowns, standing upon the backs of mythical beasts, facing the figure of a king who approaches them in reverence. The artistic mastery is undeniable, mirroring the fine detail of palace reliefs. But here, the context changes everything. The first, overwhelming challenge is one of pure logistics. How did they do this? The cliff at Multai is not a gentle slope. It is a sheer, daunting rock face high above the valley floor. Teams of sculptors would have had to be transported to this remote location, along with all their tools, supplies, and scaffolding. They likely worked from the top down, suspended by ropes and wooden platforms, a dizzying and dangerous task. Each strike of the chisel had to be precise. There are no second chances on a mountain. A major error could not be plastered over or discarded. It would mar the sacred image forever. This operation required not just artists, but expert mountaineers, engineers, and quartermasters, a multi-year project in a place with no permanent settlement. This forces us to ask, why go to such insane effort? If the message was just for the royal court, palace walls were sufficient. The location is the message. By carving their gods and king into the bedrock of a distant mountain pass, the Assyrians were performing a profound act of territorial and spiritual claiming. This was a permanent billboard for anyone traveling through the region, from nomadic tribes to rival powers. It declared, this land, even its wildest reaches, is under the watch of Assyrian gods and the authority of the Assyrian king. The wilderness itself was being civilized, ordered, and absorbed into the imperial narrative. The reliefs also likely functioned as a sacred open-air sanctuary, a place for ritual during royal expeditions. Imagine the king standing before these towering images of the gods, the ceremony amplified by the natural amphitheater of the mountains, a fusion of political theater and divine communion. This artifact fundamentally challenges the idea that Assyrian art was an interior decoration confined to the privacy of palace rooms. Multi proves it was a tool of geopolitical engineering. They practiced a form of monumental land art 2.5 millennia before the term was coined. They understood that to truly control a space, you must imprint your myth upon its most immutable features. The cliffs at Multi are not a background, they are the canvas, and the empire's signature is carved into the bones of the earth. The remote cliffs of Multi bear witness to an empire that could shape stone, but their mastery extended far beyond carving rock. It reached into the very transformation of matter, from dull earth into radiant, translucent color. This knowledge was not locked in the hands of a secretive guild. It was written down for anyone who could read the signs. Among the thousands of tablets in Ashurbanipal's library, archaeologists found something extraordinary, not literature or law, but laboratory notebooks. These cuneiform texts are precise, step-by-step recipes for creating glass and ceramic glazes. They read with a startlingly modern clarity. One typical formula might instruct the artisan to take 60 parts of sand, mix it with 180 parts of ash from a specific plant, add 5 parts of chalk as a stabilizer, and heat it all in a kiln for a specific duration at a high temperature. To create the famous deep blue glaze, another recipe specifies the exact addition of a cobalt ore. This is not guesswork or alchemical mysticism. This is systematic, repeatable chemical engineering. The challenge these tablets present is profound. They dismantle the romantic notion of ancient craft as purely intuitive, tacit knowledge passed silently from master to apprentice. Here in stark, administrative script is codified empirical science. The Assyrian glassmaker was following a protocol. He knew that altering the ratio of ash to sand would change the melting point and clarity of the glass. He understood that copper would yield a turquoise green, manganese a purple, and cobalt that brilliant royal blue. This represents a monumental leap in human thought. It is the move from observing that fire turns sand into a shiny lump to actively deconstructing the process, isolating variables, and recording the results for consistent replication. This knowledge had a spectacular purpose. While the most famous use of such glazes would later adorn the Ishtar Gate of Babylon, the technological foundation was laid in Assyria. They envisioned palaces shimmering with blue, gold, and white-baked bricks, a vision of heaven on earth made possible by chemistry. These tablets force us to redefine what we mean by science in the ancient world. It was not the theoretical physics of the Greeks, but a fiercely practical, materials-based science born from relentless experimentation. They were not just artists, they were early chemists who understood that the secret to capturing the color of the sky lay not in magic, but in the careful weighing of a dark, unassuming rock. The same hands that carved the agony of lions also sculpted a scene of perfect tranquility. In the North Palace of Nineveh, not far from the Hunt reliefs, lies the garden party of Ashurbanipal. Here, the air is not thick with dust and roars, but perfumed with blossoms. The king reclines on an ornate, high-backed couch, a royal diadem upon his head. He holds a delicate bowl, perhaps filled with wine. Beside him, elevated to an equal position, sits his queen, Labali Sharat. She is not a background figure, but a central participant, gesturing gracefully as if in conversation. They are surrounded by the lush bounty of a cultivated garden, with stylized trees and hanging clusters of dates. Attendants with fly whisks stand by, and musicians may have been depicted in now lost fragments. This is not a scene of conquest, but of consummation, the enjoyment of the peace and prosperity that conquest was meant to secure. The detail is exquisite, from the intricate patterns on the royal robes and the fine details of the furniture, to the serene, almost intimate expressions on the royal couple's faces. This single slab of stone delivers a powerful corrective to history. For centuries, the Assyrians have been caricatured in popular imagination as one-dimensional warlords, their culture defined solely by the brutal efficiency displayed on their battle reliefs. The garden party relief shatters that caricature. It reveals a society with a highly developed aesthetic sense, one that valued luxury, refined craftsmanship, and the art of leisure. The elaborate garden itself is a statement, a testament to advanced horticulture and landscape design, a controlled paradise that symbolized the king's ability to bring order and beauty to the world. Perhaps most significantly, the prominent, equal placement of the queen challenges our assumptions about gender roles in such a militaristic empire. Labali Sharat is not hidden away. She is a public partner in this vision of ideal kingship. Her presence suggests that within the palace, women of the highest rank could wield considerable social and possibly political influence, shaping court culture and diplomacy. This artifact forces us to hold two truths in tension. The empire that could engineer terrifying sieges was also an empire that could design a perfect afternoon. It reminds us that no civilization, no matter how fierce its exterior, is monolithic. Behind the fortress walls lay gardens, and beside the warrior king sat a queen, in a scene so human it could have happened yesterday. The serene garden of the royal couple hints at a society that cherished life, and to protect that life, they built a system of healing as complex as their palaces. Among the thousands of tablets in Ashurbanipal's library, a significant portion is devoted not to gods or kings, but to the human body in distress. The Assyrian medical texts, many copied from far older Babylonian originals, present a world where a cough could be a symptom of a chill or the hand of a ghost. A diagnosis might read, if a man's temples cause him pain, his ears roar, and his eyesight is dim, it is the hand of a ghost. If he has a fever and his belly is inflamed, it is the hand of the god Shamash. This language seems purely supernatural to us, but the treatment that follows reveals a startlingly pragmatic mind. For that fever and inflamed belly, the prescription is not just an incantation. It is a detailed herbal compound, often involving myrrh, crushed seeds, and beer, to be taken for several days. This duality is the core of their medical genius. The cause was spiritual, but the cure was often firmly physical. They had a vast materia medica, a catalogue of hundreds of medicinal plants, minerals, and animal products, each with specific applications. They knew the properties of licorice for coughs, the disinfectant power of thyme, and how to use opium as a painkiller. Their procedural knowledge was just as advanced. One text describes how to treat an abscess, a painful collection of pus. The healer is instructed to use a bronze lancet to make a crucial incision at the lowest point of the swelling to allow proper drainage, and then to pack the wound with a medicated bandage. This is not guesswork. It is a clear, repeatable surgical protocol that demonstrates an understanding of anatomy and the principles of infection management. They had detailed instructions for setting broken bones with splints and bandages, for treating wounds with washes and plasters, and even for dental procedures. This comprehensive system delivers a profound challenge to the conventional history of medicine. For generations, the narrative placed the birth of rational, observational medicine in 5th century Greece, with figures like Hippocrates and his famous oath. The Assyrian texts, some over 1,000 years older, force a dramatic revision. Here was a fully developed, systematic medical tradition that meticulously recorded symptoms, proposed diagnoses based on observation, and prescribed logical, often effective, treatments derived from centuries of empirical trial and error. They did not separate the mind and spirit from the body. They treated the patient as a whole. The ghost was the diagnosis for the unknown pathogen, but the herbal broth was the antibiotic. This artifact reveals that the quest to heal, to observe, and to systematize knowledge is not the invention of any one culture, but a fundamental human impulse that flourished in the heart of Mesopotamia long before it was codified in the West. But the healing arts of the Assyrians were not solely for the living. They also forged shields for the soul, and some of the most powerful were small enough to hold in your hand. In the quiet corners of museum collections, away from the colossal lamassu, you will find them. The bronze statuettes of protective jennies, each standing perhaps 6 inches tall. They are compact power cast in metal. A typical figure depicts a bearded, muscular man, his face framed by curls, with the elegant wings of an eagle rising from his back. In one hand, he often holds a small bucket, in the other, a pine cone. This is the same ritual apparatus seen in the giant palace reliefs, used for sprinkling, purifying water. But here, the scale is intimate, personal. The true revelation of these small bronzes is not in their artistry, though it is often fine, but in their sheer quantity and standardization. They were not unique royal commissions. Analysis of casting techniques and stylistic details suggests they were produced in workshops, likely in significant numbers. They were, in essence, mass-produced belief. This presents a quiet but profound challenge to our understanding of Assyrian spirituality. We are accustomed to seeing their religion as a grand, state-run affair, with kings as chief priests and palaces as temples, all documented on monumental stone. These statuettes tell a different, more personal story. They speak of a widespread domestic piety that thrived alongside the official cult. An ordinary Assyrian merchant, a soldier's wife, or a farmer could own a piece of the supernatural, a tangible guardian for their home. They could place it in a niche, bury it at the foundation of a new house, or carry it as a personal amulet. This implies a belief in accessible, everyday divine protection. You did not need to be a king to have a genie on your side. You just needed to visit the right artisan. This, in turn, reveals a vibrant market for spiritual goods, an economy of faith where craftsmen catered to the anxieties and hopes of common people. The artifact dismantles the simplistic, top-down view of ancient religion. It shows us that while the state projected an image of God supporting the empire, individuals were busy negotiating their own contracts with the invisible world. The giant relief showed the king ensuring cosmic order, but this small bronze figure was about ensuring a safe childbirth, a successful journey, or protection from the evil eye. It proves that the spiritual life of Assyria was not a monolith dictated solely from the palace, but a rich, layered tapestry woven from both imperial decree and private, heartfelt need. In the worn surface of this little genius, touched by countless hands over millennia, we feel the pulse of personal faith, a quiet counterpoint to the thunder of state ritual. The personal faith captured in bronze coexisted with a very public, relentless engine of war. Among the most dynamic scenes in Assyrian art are those depicting the cavalry, and they tell a story of breathtakingly rapid evolution. Early reliefs from the reign of Ashurnasirpal II in the 9th century before the Common Era show a system that seems almost clumsy by later standards. We see a pair of riders controlling a pair of horses. One man, the reins of both animals in his hands, is purely the driver. His partner, the fighter, holds a bow and a quiver of arrows, but he is entirely dependent on the driver for stability and direction. They are a team, a primitive but effective chariot split into 2 separate bodies. This was a formidable force, but it had clear limitations in speed, coordination, and flexibility on rough terrain. Then, within the span of just a few generations, the art changes dramatically. By the time of Ashurbanipal in the 7th century, the cavalryman is a solo operator, a master of his mount. He rides a single, powerful horse, controlling it with his knees and perhaps a simple bridle, leaving both hands free to wield a composite bow, draw the string to his ear, and fire with deadly accuracy at full gallop. His legs are often shown gripping the horse's bare back, his body moving in fluid unison with the animal. This is not just an artistic preference, it is a documentary record of a military revolution. The challenge these sequential reliefs pose is to the conventional narrative of ancient warfare as slow to change. Here we see, carved in stone, a cycle of innovation that feels startlingly modern. The Assyrian military was not a static institution relying on tradition. It was a laboratory constantly observing, experimenting, and adapting. The shift from paired riders to the independent, heavily armed horsemen required a cascade of supporting innovations. It meant the selective breeding of stronger, faster horses capable of carrying an armored man. It demanded new saddle designs, or at the very least, sophisticated training methods to achieve that seamless rider-horse bond. It required a new kind of soldier, one who was as much an equestrian athlete as a warrior. This visual timeline proves the Assyrians were not merely conquerors who overwhelmed with numbers. They were tactical pioneers who understood that the next victory depended on outthinking and outmaneuvering the enemy. Their development of a true, effective cavalry force was a leap on par with the introduction of the tank in the 20th century. It redefined the battlefield's geometry, allowing for unprecedented speed, shock attacks, and flanking maneuvers. These reliefs show us the moment when the horse ceased to be just a vehicle and became a true weapon system, an innovation that would echo through the armies of Persia, Greece, and Rome, changing the face of warfare forever. A world of strategy and chance unfolded on a board of shell, lapis lazuli, and red limestone, discovered in royal tombs at the Assyrian city of Ur, and later found in copies across Assyrian sites. The royal game of Ur is a masterpiece of leisure. The board itself is a work of art, a rectangular slab of wood inlaid with 20 squares of intricate mosaic, forming a winding, flower-like path. Each piece, the equivalent of a modern game token, was a small, elegant pyramid or disc, also crafted from precious materials. For decades, it was a beautiful mystery, a silent artifact in a museum case. Then, a breakthrough came from the very library we have already explored. Among the tablets in Ashurbanipal's collection, a scholar named Irving Finkel discovered a cuneiform text that was not a hymn or a recipe, but something wonderfully ordinary. It was a rule book written in the 2nd century before the Common Era, but likely copying rules far older. This tablet laid out the complete instructions for a game called the Game of 20 Squares. Suddenly, the silent board came to life. We learned it was a race game for 2 players, a blend of strategy and pure luck played with pyramid-shaped dice. The goal was to move your pieces along the elaborate path, navigating safe and dangerous squares, racing to get all your tokens off the board before your opponent. The game required tactical thinking, risk assessment, and the acceptance of fortune's whims. This artifact delivers a profound social challenge. We have seen the Assyrians as master builders, fearsome warriors, and meticulous administrators. The royal game of Ur reveals them as people who needed to play. This was not a child's diversion. Elaborate sets were found in royal graves, suggesting kings and nobles wagered and strategized over these boards. Simpler versions found in ordinary homes tell us the same game, the same thrill of competition, echoed in taverns and family courtyards. It connects the elite and the commoner in a shared, deeply human tradition. The game's legacy is perhaps its most stunning feature. Its basic mechanics, the racetrack, the combination of dice and tactics, are the direct ancestor of backgammon, a game still played by millions today. This single board, therefore, is not an isolated artifact. It is a node in a cultural network stretching back to the earliest cities of Sumer and forward into our own living rooms. It complicates the stern, militaristic facade of Assyrian society with a simple, undeniable truth. They laughed, they schemed, they groaned at bad rolls of the dice. In the clatter of pyramid dice on an inlaid board, we hear the sound of an empire at rest, its people connected not by fear or duty, but by the universal, timeless desire for a good game. That same game board, a symbol of leisure and chance, rested in a world where the stakes of a broken promise were infinitely higher. A stark slab of stone, known as the Treaty of Esarhaddon, stands as a monument to a different kind of game, one played for the fate of nations. Erected by King Esarhaddon in the 7th century before the Common Era, it records a detailed vassal treaty imposed upon a group of Median princes in what is now Iran. The stele begins with the expected formalities, listing the obligations of the subject rulers, their duties of loyalty, and the terms of their submission. But then the text descends into a realm of pure psychological terror. The curse section is not a mere formality, it is a meticulously crafted nightmare. The treaty invokes the entire Assyrian pantheon to unleash a cascade of divine punishment upon anyone who breaks this oath. The curses are visceral and horrifying. May the gods turn your land into a battlefield, your cities into ruins. May they fill your rivers with blood instead of water. May they decree that a mother bar her door to her own son. May they send a persistent cough, a crippling fever, and unbearable intestinal disease to waste your bodies. May your corpses be thrown to the dogs and pigs with no one to bury your bones. This is not just a legal document, it is a weapon of mass intimidation carved in stone. The challenge it presents is to our understanding of how empires truly function. Conventional history often portrays the Assyrian Empire as a colossus held together by sheer military brutality, a simple equation of conquest and fear. This stele reveals a far more sophisticated and chilling reality. Yes, the army could crush a rebellion, but the true goal was to prevent the rebellion from ever starting. The treaty was a tool of preemptive control, a masterclass in psychological warfare. By inscribing these curses and erecting the stele in a public place, Esarhaddon was doing something profound. He was externalizing the conscience of his vassals. He made the invisible threat of Assyrian retribution visible, tangible, and eternal. Every time a Median prince felt a twinge of ambition or resentment, he would remember the stone and the litany of horrors promised by the gods themselves. The empire was not just a geographic or military entity, it was a psychological and ideological construct. It ruled through the mind as much as through the sword, leveraging deep-seated religious belief to enforce political compliance. This artifact forces us to see Assyrian power in its full, terrifying dimension. They understood that the most durable chains are forged not from iron, but from fear, ritual, and the belief in divine justice. The treaty stele asks a haunting question which is more powerful: the army that can destroy your city, or the curse that can convince you to never defy the king in the first place? From the psychological terror of treaty curses, we shift to a quieter, more profound act of human understanding. A small, unassuming clay tablet, no larger than your hand, rests in the British Museum. It is catalogued as the Assyrian map of the world, and it was found among the scholarly collections of Ashurbanipal's library. At first glance, it seems almost childish. A simple circle is inscribed containing a few labeled shapes. In the very center, a rectangle marked Babylon is bisected by a vertical line representing the Euphrates River. Around this central landmass flows a circular band labeled Bitter River or Salt Water, the great ocean that was believed to encircle the entire Earth. Beyond that ring of water at the edges of the disk are 8 small triangular wedges labeled Region or Island, Mysterious, Distant Lands. This is not a map for navigation. You could not use it to sail from Nineveh to Egypt. Its purpose was not to guide the body, but to orient the mind. This schematic drawing is one of the oldest surviving attempts in human history to visually conceptualize the entirety of the known world. Its creation marks a monumental leap in consciousness. The challenge it presents is to the very timeline of intellectual history. For generations, the narrative of cartography began with the Greeks, with figures like Anaximander in the 6th century before the Common Era. credited with creating the first world map. This Assyrian tablet, likely dating to a similar or even earlier period, shatters that exclusive claim. It proves that the impulse to model the cosmos, to take the chaotic experience of lands, rivers, and seas and reduce it to an ordered diagram, was a human universal, flowering independently in the heart of Mesopotamia. The map is a fusion of geography, mythology, and cosmology. Babylon is literally the center of the universe, reflecting its supreme cultural and religious significance to the Mesopotamian people. The circular ocean is both a geographical guess and a mythological concept, the primordial waters of chaos that surround the ordered world. The outer triangles are not accurate coastlines, but conceptual placeholders for the terrifying unknown, the lands of monsters and strange peoples mentioned in epic tales. This artifact reveals a civilization grappling with the biggest questions of all. Where are we? What is the shape of our reality? Their answer was a brilliant act of intellectual compression. They took the immense, unknowable breadth of creation and contained it within a circle of clay, making the universe comprehensible, manageable, and centered on their own divine order. It is a humble, profound declaration. We are here, and this is our world. In its simple lines, we see the birth of a worldview, not as a story told, but as a space drawn, a foundational step toward all the maps that would ever follow. The world map reduced the cosmos to a diagram, but the Assyrians did not live in a world of simple lines. They lived in a world of dazzling, saturated color. Deep within the military arsenal of Fort Shalmaneser at Nimrud, archaeologists uncovered fragments of a forgotten rainbow. These were not carved stone slabs, but glazed brick panels, and they transform our mental image of an Assyrian palace entirely. Picture, if you will, a wall not of somber gray alabaster, but a vibrant mosaic of thousands of individually fired bricks, each coated in a glass-like glaze of brilliant cobalt blue, sunshine yellow, emerald green, and milky white. Arranged in precise patterns, they formed colossal images of the king in royal regalia, majestic striding lions, and intricate geometric borders that shimmered in the Mesopotamian sun. The aesthetic impact must have been staggering, a visual declaration of power through pure, radiant beauty. But the true marvel lies not in the design, but in the mud and fire that made it possible. Creating these panels was a feat of industrial-scale chemistry and logistics. Each brick began as common clay, but its transformation was anything but simple. Artisans had to mix precise recipes of metallic oxides, cobalt for blue, copper for green, antimony for yellow, into a glass-forming paste. This glazed slurry had to be applied evenly to each brick before firing. Then came the critical, unforgiving step, the kiln. Firing glazed bricks is a nightmare of variables. The temperature must be high enough to melt the glaze into a smooth, glassy coating, typically over 1,000 degrees Celsius, but uniform across the entire kiln. A hot spot or a cold corner would mean a batch of bricks with bubbled, discolored, or dull surfaces, a costly waste of fuel, materials, and labor. To produce the hundreds or thousands of identical bricks needed for a single panel required kilns of immense size and sophisticated design, with flues and vents to control airflow and temperature with remarkable consistency. This was mass production with zero tolerance for error, conducted over 2,600 years ago. The survival of these colors, still vibrant after millennia buried in debris, is a testament to their chemical mastery. They formulated glazes that were not just beautiful but durable, resistant to weathering and fading. This artifact fundamentally challenges two persistent myths. First, it shatters the monochrome illusion of the ancient world. Our imagination, fed by the stone ruins we see today, paints Assyria in shades of dust and sandstone. These bricks scream otherwise. Their palaces were explosions of color, designed to overwhelm the senses and proclaim a civilization that could command not just stone, but light itself. Second, it redefines technological prowess. We marvel at their carved reliefs, but the silent, chemical genius behind a perfectly fired blue brick represents a different, equally profound intelligence. It reveals a society with standardized manufacturing protocols, quality control, and a mastery of pyrotechnology that feels eerily modern. To walk through Fort Shalmaneser in its prime was not to walk through a fortress of grim stone, but through a gallery of luminous, impossible color, a testament to an empire that could weaponize beauty as effectively as it wielded a sword. The shimmering walls of Fort Shalmaneser were a shield of beauty, but the Assyrians knew that true danger often came in forms no brick could block. In the shadowy corners of their world, another kind of protector stood guard, one whose appearance was designed to terrify. This is Pazuzu, the king of the wind demons. Cast in bronze or carved in stone, his image is a chilling fusion of nightmare parts. He bears the snarling, sharp-toothed head of a dog or a lion, the scaly body of a fish, the taloned feet of a bird of prey, and two sets of wings, one feathered and one leathery, rising from his back. His right hand is perpetually raised, while his left often clutches a serpent. This is not a creature of comfort. He is the embodiment of the destructive, scorching east wind that brought drought and disease. And yet, paradoxically, he became one of the most popular protective amulets in Assyria. His primary function was not to attack humans, but to attack other demons. Specifically, he was the sworn enemy of Lamashtu, the demoness who preyed on mothers and infants. A Pazuzu head worn on a necklace or placed in a room was a spiritual guard dog, using his own formidable evil to chase away an even greater one. This reveals a supernatural ecosystem of astonishing complexity. The Assyrian spirit world was not a simple battle between good gods and evil demons. It was a layered, bureaucratic cosmos filled with beings of ambivalent power and specialized jurisdictions. Pazuzu's role was profoundly nuanced. He was a destructive force of nature given a face and a name, but by invoking him, by wearing his likeness, an individual could channel that raw, chaotic power and point it at a targeted threat. It was a form of spiritual jiu-jitsu, using the enemy's own strength against him. The sheer number of small Pazuzu heads and plaques found in domestic settings, from grand houses to modest dwellings, delivers a powerful challenge to our modern, binary thinking about good and evil. For the Assyrians, the spirit world was a practical reality to be negotiated, not just a theological concept to be believed in. Their relationship with a being like Pazuzu was almost contractual. I acknowledge your power, I give you form through this amulet, and in return, you direct your fury toward the forces that seek to harm me and my family. This was a pragmatic, personal form of spirituality that operated alongside the grand state religion. It shows a people deeply engaged with the invisible forces around them, not as passive victims, but as active participants in a constant, delicate negotiation for safety in an unpredictable and often terrifying world. The chaotic power of a wind demon could be invoked for protection, but the true stability of the empire flowed from a far more tangible source. Carved into the stone walls of Sennacherib's palace, a different kind of relief tells a story not of conquest but of creation. We see teams of laborers, not soldiers, hauling massive limestone blocks. Engineers stand with measuring rods, directing the construction of something monumental, yet utterly peaceful, a great stone channel bridging a valley. This is the aqueduct at Jerwan, and its depiction is a blueprint for a forgotten industrial revolution. Commissioned by King Sennacherib to bring fresh water from mountain springs to his capital, Nineveh, over 50 kilometers away, it was not a simple ditch. The Jerwan aqueduct was a feat of precision engineering, built from over 2 million stone blocks, with a carefully calculated gradient to maintain a steady, gentle flow. Its archways and mortar-sealed channel represent the world's first known stone aqueduct, predating the famous Roman examples by nearly 400 years. But the reliefs show us this was just the pinnacle of a widespread hydraulic society. We see the humble shaduf, a counterweighted lever for lifting water from canals into irrigation channels, turning arid fields green. We see complex networks of canals, sluice gates and reservoirs, all managed by a central bureaucracy. Water was not just for survival, it was for splendor, feeding the lush pleasure gardens that adorned their palaces, the very gardens where Ashurbanipal held his famous party. This mastery of hydraulics presents a quiet, monumental challenge to the conventional history of engineering. We are taught to see large-scale, state-funded infrastructure as a hallmark of Roman genius. The Assyrian reliefs and the physical ruins at Jerwan force a dramatic revision. Here was a civilization that understood watersheds, gradients, and the mass mobilization of labor for projects of public utility centuries before Rome laid its first sewer. Their engineering prowess was not limited to siege ramps, it was channeled into sustaining life. They transformed the parched Mesopotamian landscape into an agricultural powerhouse capable of feeding the colossal populations of cities like Nineveh, which may have held over 100,000 people. This required more than brute force, it required advanced mathematics to calculate slopes, geology to select materials, and a systems-thinking approach to manage an entire region's water from source to field to bathhouse. The aqueduct at Jerwan stands today, a silent, broken monument in the Iraqi hills. It asks us to look beyond the terrifying reputation of the Assyrian war machine and see the civilization that thrived because of it, a society that could marshal its resources not just to destroy cities, but to build the arteries that made a metropolis live and breathe. The water that flowed through Jerwan's aqueduct sustained a capital, but the words that flowed from the king's scribes were meant to sustain a legacy. In the same rain that built those channels of stone, Sennacherib's scribes fired another masterpiece, this one made of clay and ambition. Known today as the Lachish prism, this six-sided pillar of baked earth is not a depiction of war but its official transcript. In precise, proud cuneiform, it records the king's military campaigns, his annals for the year 701 before the Common Era. And here, amidst lists of conquered cities and tallies of captives, we find one of the most famous and chilling boasts in all of ancient history. Speaking of the Judahite king Hezekiah who had dared to rebel, Sennacherib declares, "As for Hezekiah the Judean, I shut him up in Jerusalem, his royal city, like a bird in a cage." The line is a masterpiece of political rhetoric. It does not claim he killed Hezekiah or that he destroyed Jerusalem. It claims something psychologically more potent: total control. The king is rendered helpless, isolated, and trapped within his own walls, waiting for the will of Assyria to decide his fate. This is the siege of Lachish and the campaign against Judah, distilled into a single, memorable image for posterity. This artifact presents us with the raw material of history, but it is material that has been carefully refined and shaped. The prism is not a neutral report, it is curated propaganda, a version of events designed for the gods, for future kings, and for eternity itself. Every deportee is counted, every city's destruction is listed to create an overwhelming ledger of imperial power. The challenge here is not about the facts of the battle, which the reliefs graphically confirm, but about the power of narrative. When we place the Lachish prism next to the biblical account, and even next to the silent implications of the reliefs that show no conquest of Jerusalem, we are forced to become detectives of motive. Sennacherib's annals aim to present an unbroken string of victories, a narrative of flawless royal power. The biblical account aims to present divine salvation, a narrative of faithful deliverance. Both are true to their purpose, and both are selective in their truth. This forces a profound lesson in historiography, the study of how history is written. The prism challenges the modern desire for a single, objective source. It is a primary source, yes, written at the time by the people involved, but it is no less biased, no less crafted than a history written centuries later. Its very existence asks us to deconstruct every ancient text we read. Who commissioned this? What were they trying to achieve? What did they omit? Empires did not just build their legacies with stone and mortar, they built them with stories fired into clay, stories meant to outlast armies and outshout their enemies. The Lachish prism does not give us the truth of what happened, it gives us the truth of how Sennacherib wanted it to be remembered. In that gap between the event and the record lies the real work of understanding the past. But the king's official story, fired into clay, was meant for the gods and for history. The story he told himself in the quiet of his private chambers was carved from something far more delicate and precious. In the storerooms of the Northwest Palace at Nimrud, archaeologists discovered a treasure not of gold, but of gleaming, creamy white tusk. The Assyrian ivory carvings are a world in miniature, a collection of thousands of exquisite plaques, panels, and figurines, each one a masterpiece of miniature sculpture. They were not standalone artworks, but the ultimate luxury finish, inlays for the wooden frames of royal thrones, beds, and footstools. Run your finger over one, and you can feel the astonishing detail, all achieved with tools finer than a needle. You will find sphinxes with the bodies of lions and the serene faces of women staring into eternity. You will see the mistress of animals, a goddess figure gripping two fierce lions by their necks, a symbol of control over the wild. There are intricate lotus blossoms, palmettes, and scenes of feasting, all framed by geometric borders of breathtaking precision. The aesthetic is unmistakable. This is not the muscular, monumental style of the Assyrian palace reliefs. This is the fluid, elegant, and often Egyptian-influenced art of the Phoenicians, the master seafarers and artisans of the Levantine coast. And that is the first clue to a deeper mystery. These ivories were almost certainly not carved in Assyria by Assyrian hands. They were commissioned luxury goods imported from the workshops of Phoenician cities like Tyre and Sidon, brought overland by caravan or up the rivers by boat to adorn the private world of the Assyrian elite. This presents a profound challenge to the enduring image of Assyria as a brutish, culturally insular empire, a fortress state concerned only with conquest and extraction. The ivory carvings reveal the opposite. They are physical proof of Assyria's deep integration into a vast, cosmopolitan economic network that spanned the known world. To acquire these objects, the empire participated in a complex web of long-distance trade. The raw elephant tusks likely came from Africa via Egyptian or Nubian traders. The skilled craftsmanship was Phoenician. The final consumers were the Assyrian royal court. This was globalization in the 9th century before the Common Era. The ivory trade was not just about beauty, it was about soft power and status. By furnishing his palace with Phoenician ivories, an Assyrian king was doing more than decorating a room. He was displaying his reach. He was showing his courtiers and foreign ambassadors that his influence and wealth could summon the finest artisans from distant lands, that the fruits of the entire world flowed to his throne. It signals a society with a sophisticated, international taste, an elite that appreciated and consumed the artistic styles of the cultures it dominated. The carvings force us to see Assyria not as a monolithic cultural force, but as a hub, a place where wealth accumulated and tastes converged. They complicate the narrative of simple plunder. Yes, tributes and spoils of war filled the treasury, but this was also conscious, selective consumption. The Assyrian king was not just a warlord, he was a connoisseur, participating in a pan-Mediterranean language of luxury that spoke of flora, myth, and mastery, a quiet, beautiful counterpoint to the roaring stone lions that guarded his public gates. That cosmopolitan taste for imported luxury existed within a society governed by iron rules. While the famous Code of Hammurabi, with its eye for an eye justice, was a Babylonian creation centuries earlier, the Assyrians were not without their own written laws. Fragments of a legal text from the reign of Sargon II have survived, and they open a window into a world with a starkly different moral compass. These are not comprehensive statutes covering all of society. Instead, they focus intensely, almost obsessively, on regulating the behavior of women and controlling the private sphere with terrifying severity. The laws prescribe brutal punishments for what we might consider private matters. A married woman seen conversing alone with another man could be subjected to mutilation, her ears and nose cut off. A woman who had an abortion without her husband's consent could be impaled on a stake. The husband, in nearly every scenario, holds the power of life and death over his wife, with the law acting as his enforcer. This legal fragment presents a social and ethical challenge far removed from debates about technology or art. It forces us to confront the grim bedrock of Assyrian society, a place where the state's drive for absolute order did not stop at the city walls or the palace gates, but penetrated directly into the home and the most intimate human relationships. The law here is revealed not as a tool for abstract justice, but as a precise instrument of social control. Its primary function was to maintain a rigid hierarchy, to eliminate any ambiguity in social roles, and to ensure the stability of the family unit as the foundational cell of the empire. A woman's body and conduct were treated as property, their regulation essential to maintaining bloodlines, inheritance, and social order. To our modern sensibilities, this is abhorrent. But the artifact asks us to do more than judge. It asks us to understand the framework. In the Assyrian worldview, chaos was the ultimate enemy, and chaos could begin anywhere, even in a whispered conversation. The law was a bulwark against that chaos, a way to codify and enforce a divinely sanctioned social structure where everyone, especially those perceived as vulnerable to disorder, knew their exact place and the terrible cost of stepping out of it. This fragment does not show us the empire at war or at leisure, but at its most ruthlessly organized. It reminds us that the glittering ivories and serene garden parties were enjoyed within a system whose idea of justice could be as unflinching and severe as the stone from which their king stared out, forever watching. That stark legal framework, built on certainty and control, existed beneath a sky that was anything but predictable. To manage the terrifying whims of the gods and fate, the Assyrians and their Babylonian successors turned their gaze upward, creating an archive of the heavens. Across centuries, scribes produced thousands of clay tablets now known as the astronomical diaries. Night after night, year after year, they recorded what they saw with meticulous care. The position of Venus at sunset, the path of Mars through the constellations, the exact timing and duration of a lunar eclipse, even the day's weather and the price of barley in the market. This was not idle stargazing. Every celestial event was a potential message, an omen sent by the gods to foretell the fate of the king and the kingdom. If Mars approached the moon, it might signal an enemy's advance. An eclipse could portend the death of a ruler. The scribe's duty was to watch, record, and interpret these divine signs for the court. On the surface, this seems the very definition of superstition, a world ruled by arbitrary divine will. But look closer at the tablets themselves. The data is precise, quantitative, and astonishingly consistent. They did not just say an eclipse happened. They recorded that it began on the 14th day of the month, when 1/3 of the moon's disk was covered, and it lasted for a specific watch of the night. This long-term, systematic data collection, driven by the urgent need to divine the future, created an unintended consequence, a massive, searchable database of celestial behavior. Over generations, patterns began to emerge from the noise. Scribes could look back through centuries of records and notice that lunar eclipses seemed to follow a repeating cycle of approximately 18 years. They could begin to predict the rough timing of planetary movements, not because they understood gravity or elliptical orbits, but because they had the empirical evidence of past cycles right there in the clay. This is where the artifact fundamentally challenges a modern bias, the clean separation we draw between science and superstition. For the Assyrian and Babylonian scholars, there was no divide. The motivation was religious and political, to understand the will of the gods. The methodology, however, was rigorously empirical and mathematical. They were testing a hypothesis: if the gods communicate through the sky, then by decoding its patterns, we can anticipate their plans. In doing so, they laid the very foundations of astronomy as a predictive science. This accumulated knowledge, this marriage of devout observation and meticulous record-keeping, was the direct precursor to the later, more famous Babylonian achievements, like the ability to predict lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy. The diaries force us to expand our definition of scientific inquiry. They prove that the disciplined observation of nature, the bedrock of all science, can arise from the most unexpected places, even from the anxious heart of an empire reading its fate in the stars. The birth of astronomy was not a clean break from myth, but a slow, patient disentangling of pattern from prophecy, all written in the silent language of numbers on clay. The stars they charted were messages from the gods, but the king who received those messages had to present himself as a god's eternal partner. In the inner sanctum of the temple of Ishtar at Nimrud, a single statue made this relationship stone. The statue of Ashurnasirpal II is not a figure of action. He stands rigidly upright, his hands clasped in a perpetual gesture of worship. His face is framed by the elaborate, ringleted beard and the royal headband, but his expression is not one of personality. It is a mask of serene, unchanging authority. Every detail, from the meticulously carved cuneiform inscription covering his robe to the symbolic mace he holds, speaks of a ruler frozen in a moment of perfect, formal devotion. The inscription itself is his standard annals, a recitation of his titles, genealogy, and military achievements, wrapping his body in a textual shell of power. This statue presents a fascinating puzzle of style. We have spent our journey marveling at the Assyrian genius for hyper-realistic narrative, at the dying lions with their individual ribs, the charging horses with straining muscles, the dynamic chaos of a siege. Yet here, in their most sacred space, that realism vanishes entirely. This king is not a man, he is an icon. His pose is frontal, symmetrical, and utterly static, designed to be viewed from the front as an object of reverence, not a participant in a story. This duality in their art is not a contradiction, but a deliberate and sophisticated choice. It challenges the modern idea that a civilization has one artistic style, one way of seeing. The Assyrians were masters of visual language, and they used different dialects for different rooms. In the public halls, the art was dynamic propaganda, a cinematic newsreel of imperial power meant to awe and intimidate visitors and courtiers. It was art of the immediate, the specific, the visceral now. But in the temple, before the eyes of the goddess, the art shifted to the eternal. Here, the king needed to be not a commander, but a conduit, a permanent, stable link between the divine and the earthly realms. The rigid, symbolic form of the statue communicated something realism could not: timelessness. It said the king's devotion, and thus his right to rule, was as fixed and unchanging as the stone itself. This artifact forces us to see Assyrian artistry not as a single note but as a complex chord. They understood that art was a tool, and you used different tools for different jobs. The chisel that could capture the flutter of a horse's mane could also carve a face devoid of all fleeting emotion, because sometimes the most powerful message is not movement but absolute, unwavering stillness. The statue of Ashurnasirpal asks us to hold both truths at once, to see the empire that documented the frantic pulse of life, and the empire that sought to sculpt itself into a permanent prayer. That eternal stone prayer of a king was offered to gods who demanded proof of earthly dominance, and the proof was often written in the blood of distant battles. In the year 853 before the Common Era, on the plains of Karkar by the Orontes River, the Assyrian war machine met a force unlike any it had ever faced. King Shalmaneser III marched south, expecting another routine conquest. What he encountered was a grand coalition, a unified front of a dozen kingdoms who had set aside their own rivalries to stop the northern Colossus. The battle was colossal, a clash that should have echoed through history, and yet for centuries it existed only in whispers and fragments, a ghost of a war. Then, in the 1860s, a large stone slab was unearthed near the village of Kirk in modern Turkey. The Kirk monolith is not a relief, it is a dense, unadorned block of text, a royal annals carved for the gods and for eternity. It records Shalmaneser's early campaigns, and there, in matter-of-fact cuneiform, is his report from Karkar. He lists his enemies, a roll call of kings from Damascus, Hamath, Arvad, and others. And then two names leap from the stone, stopping historians cold. The first is Ahab the Israelite. He is credited with contributing 2,000 chariots and 10,000 infantry to the Allied force, making the Kingdom of Israel one of the coalition's most powerful members. The second, even more startling name is Masri. This is a term Assyrians often used for Egypt. The inscription suggests that even the ancient power of the Nile, far to the south, had a hand, or at least a contingent of troops in this northern alliance. This single slab of stone delivers a challenge of monumental scale to the conventional, compartmentalized histories we often tell. The Bible mentions King Ahab, of course, but its narrative is intensely focused on his domestic sins, his conflict with the prophet Elijah, and his wars with the neighboring Arameans of Damascus. It is a national and theological history. There is not a single word in the biblical text about Ahab leading a vast army to Syria to join a pan-regional alliance against Assyria. The Kirk monolith forces these two separate worlds, the Assyrian administrative record and the Israelite religious chronicle, to collide. It provides an absolute external date for a biblical king, placing Ahab firmly in a specific year, fighting in a specific battle far from home. But it does much more than that. It shatters the illusion of isolated national stories. Here, carved by their greatest enemy, is proof that the kingdoms of the Levant, and possibly even Egypt, were deeply politically aware and capable of sophisticated, large-scale diplomacy. They understood the existential threat Assyria posed, and they united across linguistic, cultural, and religious lines to confront it. The monolith reveals the 9th century before the Common Era, not as a time of small, squabbling city-states, but as a tense, interconnected geopolitical chessboard, where the fate of Jerusalem could be linked to decisions made in Damascus, Hamath, and perhaps even Thebes. It asks us to rewrite the map of the ancient world in our minds, to see it not as a collection of separate boxes, but as a vibrating web of alliances where a king of Israel could be a major player on an international stage, his story written not just in Jerusalem, but on a stone stele hundreds of miles away by an emperor who saw him not as a sinner, but as a formidable enemy commander. The battle itself, Shalmaneser claims, was a great victory, though his decision not to press southward for years afterward suggests a stalemate or a costly fight. But the true victory of the Kirk monolith is over historical ignorance. It pulls a world war out of the shadows and places it firmly and incontrovertibly into the light. A perfect sphere of dark stone rests in a museum drawer, unlabeled and unexplained. It is not large, perhaps the size of a clenched fist, and its surface is worn smooth by time and handling. Found among the rubble of an Assyrian administrative building, it was catalogued with a question mark. This is the final artifact on our list, a humble counterpoint to the towering gates and glittering ivories, and it may be the most honest object of them all. We have no grand name for it, no royal inscription, no mythic scene carved upon its surface. It is simply an Assyrian sphere, one of several such objects found across various sites. Its very simplicity becomes the ultimate challenge. What was it for? The theories are as varied as they are inconclusive. It could be a weight, part of a standardized system of measurement for a marketplace, its perfect symmetry ensuring consistent value. It might be a gaming piece for a board game we have yet to fully reconstruct, rolled or placed in a ritual of chance. Some have suggested a mace head, though its balance seems off for violence or a ritual object, a symbol of cosmic perfection held during ceremonies. Each explanation fits, yet none are proven. This small stone ball embodies the silent majority of archaeology, the objects that refuse to speak. For every black obelisk that names a king, there are 1,000 such spheres, pottery shards, and broken tools whose stories are muted. They represent the vast, mundane reality of a civilization, the unrecorded hours of daily life that never made it into royal annals or onto palace walls. The sphere's mystery is a necessary humility. It reminds us that for all the breathtaking connections we have made, for every battle confirmed and technology revealed, enormous gaps remain in our understanding of the Assyrian mind. We can reconstruct their wars, but can we truly hear the laughter in a tavern over a game of 20 squares? We can translate their medical texts, but can we feel the anxious hope of a mother clutching a Pazuzu amulet? The sphere is a fragment of that lost world, a world of ordinary hands and ordinary tasks. Its perfect geometry shows careful crafting, a purpose, but that purpose is now a closed door. This is where history ends and mystery begins. It invites not conclusion, but continuous curiosity. Every unanswered question, from the Nimrod lens to this stone sphere, is an invitation to keep looking, to keep questioning the story we think we know. The Assyrians left us a legacy written in crystal, bronze, and clay, a challenge carved in stone. They ask us to remember that the past is not a puzzle to be solved, but a conversation to be joined, one where the most profound answers often lie in the quiet dignity of the things we do not yet understand. 30 objects have led us from forgotten libraries to silent battlefields, from the microscopic world of a cylinder sealed to the cosmic scale of a world map. Each one, in its own way, has chipped away at a centuries-old caricature. The Assyrian Empire emerges not as a monolithic war machine, but as a breathtakingly complex civilization. We have met its scientists in the glassmaker's recipes, its artists in the dying lion's final breath, its engineers in the aqueduct's graceful arch, and its theologians in the hybrid guardians at the door. They were conquerors, yes, but they were also curators, chemists, and chess players. The collective weight of these artifacts does more than fill museum cases. It actively challenges the timelines written in our textbooks. It pushes back the dawn of optics, of chemistry, of systematic medicine, and of cartography by centuries. It reveals a spiritual world of nuance where demons could be protectors and trees held the universe in balance. It provides the stone-cold corroboration that turns biblical kings from legend into historical figures caught in a geopolitical storm. This journey asks us to hold a more profound, more human truth about the past. Progress is not a straight line, and genius is not the property of any one era or culture. It flickers, it is forgotten, and it is rediscovered in the silent language of objects left behind. So we leave you with a question born from 30 mysteries. Which of these artifacts shifted your perception the most? Was it the pragmatic terror of a treaty's curse, or the serene beauty of a garden party? Did the lonely sphere or the focused lens make you wonder what else is waiting to be understood? The conversation with history is never over. If these enigmas captured your curiosity, consider subscribing to join us as we uncover more puzzles from the ancient world. And we would love to hear from you. Share your own theories in the comments below. Which of these Assyrian artifacts do you believe holds the greatest unanswered secret?